All right. I'm on, and everybody else can unmute themselves and be on.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good, Ben.
I'm still trying to get over the Jacksonville pick.
ETN?
Yes. I mean, I was going to start with biggest surprises, but I think that may be my biggest surprise so far. So, first of all, let me just say hi, everybody. Welcome to the Football Outsiders post-draft recap Twitch stream, our first ever Twitch stream. Thank you, everybody who's joining us. CO the Legend, thank you for your woo. We're going to be here. We thought there'd be about 2 or 3 picks left when we started at 11:30, but then Kings of Leon had to take over and play extra. So we still have 6 picks left in the draft, but we will keep everybody updated on the final 6 picks of the first round. So I was going to start by saying, what's your biggest surprise of the first round? And my biggest surprise is Jacksonville taking Travis Etienne, because I think Jacksonville did a great job last year of proving the value you can get out of an undrafted running back. And this is a team that went 1-15 and has tons of holes, and they took a second running back with their second first-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I didn't even have any notes prepared for this because it didn't cross my mind that it could happen. But I mean, James Robinson, I think, was one of the top 10 or 15 or so backs in both broken tackle percentage and yards after contact per attempt. I mean, just seemed like an absolute gem of a find for them last season. They had so many other needs. It just seems like a really strange choice.
To me, the reason I didn't actually think it was that surprising was, one, when's the last time Urban Meyer didn't have the best running back in a given game? I mean, he probably hasn't. I mean, and granted, the college game is different, but I think that that's something that he's very used to. Two, I guess aside from Ezekiel Elliott, and if you especially look back at, Meyer's days at Florida, like a lot of his backs had speed, and that's kind of the selling point with Etienne. So whatever we want to say about value of running backs, which I would agree with, I think particularly in this case with Etienne, who I don't think is a good third down back. I think it just makes sense in terms of the way Meyer is going to want to try to build his team, regardless of how good this pick is in terms of value.
I mean,
Yeah,
Aaron, Aaron, do you buy it as like the old school Peyton Manning, like let's help the young quarterback by getting a really good running back type of argument?
A little bit, and I think I buy the idea that this is Urban Meyer's type of game, and that Urban Meyer is maybe thinking a little bit of his life on the lower level, right? In the college level, the value of a running back is higher than at the NFL level. I realized I didn't introduce everybody to our viewers. So we got so excited about Jacksonville taking a running back, I forgot to say who's joining me. So hi, I'm Aaron Schatz. I am the editor-in-chief of FootballOutsiders.com. Joining me are Derek Klassen in the upper left. He is our draft prospect expert. Benjamin Robinson in the lower left from Grinding the Mocks. He is our expert on the value of players compared to conventional wisdom, which is important because the fact is conventional wisdom is usually pretty right about where these guys come out. And Scott Spratt in the bottom right, he is our Football Outsiders fantasy expert and just all-around good dude.
Well, that's why I had to jump in there, Aaron. We may not be talking running backs for a little bit while longer, so I had to get into the discussion early.
So I'm curious, Ben, you were going to say something about Etienne. What was his, like, were people expecting him to go in the first round? Or just not to Jacksonville, probably?
Yeah, so I have a metric called expected draft position. So what it generally does is I take a huge sample of mock drafts, some of them people you make them you think, some of them maybe not, put them into a model, weighting newer mock drafts later than older mock drafts, and weighting mock drafts created by more reputable industry folks than non. And Travis Etienne had a 30th ranked expected draft position. So kind of closer to the end of the first round where, Buffalo was picking potentially. I think that's what maybe some of the draft nicks were thinking. But I think the sense was that he wasn't going to be available when Jacksonville was picking at pick 33. So I think that's the rationale here. I agree that James Robinson was probably something where you said, oh, you can find a guy as an undrafted free agent to have a really great year. Like, why invest in a first round pick? So I'm not sure if Jacksonville will live to regret this pick, but I think early on in this new Urban Meyer Trent Baalke regime, it's as good as time to do that as any.
I'm just going to update everybody on picks. The Baltimore Ravens, who definitely needed a wide receiver, just took Rashad Bateman from Minnesota with the 27th overall pick. So I was going to ask, to start off, basically ask everybody, what was your biggest surprise of the first round so far? So I'll start with you, Derek. What was your biggest surprise of the first round so far? Mine was Etienne. What was yours?
I mean, on a smaller level, I think that team of, that 7 to 9 area, those teams not taking Fields a little bit to me was surprising. But I think probably the Raiders taking Leatherwood where they did, I think in terms of conventional wisdom, like you mentioned before, was probably a little bit of overdrafted. I guess it makes sense in the sense of like Gruden and Mayock really seem to like these guys who play for ranked teams and seem to be high character guys, which I think Leatherwood probably is. So I guess it makes sense in that sense. But, in terms of conventional wisdom, where he was going to go, going over a guy like Christian Darrisaw, it kind of just took me a little bit for a loop, I think.
It makes sense given that the Raiders overdraft guys. It seems like we go through this every year where the Raiders draft a guy way earlier than he was expected to be taken. We went through it with Damon Arnett last year, with Cleveland Farrell the year before, now Leatherwood.
Yep. Yeah, we see that in the data quite a bit as well. In my mock draft, Football Outsiders, in the previous years, the Raiders had 2 picks, and what they did was one of their picks ended up being kind of with consensus. Your Josh Jacobs, with last year with Henry Ruggs a little bit, but not too far off consensus. But this year with Leatherwood, that's one of the kind of top 2 picks so far of the first round in terms of negative, what I would call draft surplus value, the difference between expected draft position and actual draft position weighted for higher picks being more valuable than earlier picks. So for me, in terms of my rankings, the biggest surprise is Mac Jones in the positive realm. My data had him in the 5th overall player by expected draft position, thinking that I think he would be going to San Francisco. And when that didn't happen, this is kind of, to be honest, I think probably one of the best case scenarios for him. So to me, that's a huge win for the Patriots. They didn't have to trade up. And you're right. I thought for a second that, some of the teams that were trading up were going to go for maybe a quarterback by surprise, just because you never know. But it didn't happen, and the Patriots reaped the rewards. I think this is a really good spot for Mac Jones, and the Patriots got really great value from the pick.
Yeah, I liked Fields better than Jones as a avowed Patriots fan. I would have preferred them to trade up rather than Chicago to get Justin Fields, but I guess I'm satisfied that they came away with one of the top 5 quarterbacks, and it's nice that they didn't have to give up any other draft value to get it. CO the Legend in our discussion thread over here, the stream chat, says biggest surprise was that the Bears were willing to trade up to get Fields because the Bears don't usually go after good quarterbacks.
That's a fair concern to have.
It's a weird incentive, I would say, when you allow Ryan Pace to have this draft, it's a weird incentive because there are a lot of people who are calling for his job this offseason, and you would think that this next year is kind of a make it or break it year. So this is kind of a classic move. And, if they had maybe selected Mac Jones instead of Justin Fields, I think people would think a lot more differently about the move. I like the move on both ends of the deal. I think that Fields started off this year as the 2nd prospect by expected draft position and seemingly kind of fell down the boards. And I think what you saw tonight is the NFL didn't think as highly of Justin Fields as the kind of prognosticators did. And I like it for the Giants as well. This is the first time David Gettleman has traded down in the first round in a draft in his tenure in Carolina and with the Giants. When you look at who they took with their pick at pick 20, it ended up being Kadarius Toney. And you can see why the Eagles decided that they felt they needed to jump over New York to Dallas's pick at pick 10 so that they could get Devontae Smith from Alabama. So, I normally would say, hey, let's look at this trade, and trading up for a wide receiver. It wasn't a huge trade up, but still trading up isn't great, but they must have really seen the difference between the wide receivers at the top of the first round and the ones that are going at the bottom of the second round, and felt that it was worth it for them to make that type of trade.
I will say, to give the Giants credit, Lee Sharp on Twitter said that even by the Jimmy Johnson chart, it was 6th in value of 107 trade downs in the first round since 2002. That's a lot of value, and it makes me wonder why teams that were just ahead of the Giants, like Dallas or Carolina, didn't do the same trade down with Chicago and get all that value.
Totally agree. But let me piggyback here too, because Kadarius Toney was the pick that I thought was the most surprising in the first round. And it's not about fit because Toney, I think, is a really nice fit for the Giants. They already have, their bigger guy. They already have slot receivers and such. So Toney being a great after the catch receiver may be very complementary to what they have going on. But and Derek maybe can probably provide better context here. Toney isn't necessarily a player that I totally love. I feel like he's a lower floor type of player, having just 50 catches in his first 3 seasons before breaking out last year. And a guy that has gotten a lot of his work through, gadget plays and other plays designed to get him the ball, maybe less of an immediate impact guy within the flow of the offense. What do you think, Derek?
Just to butt in here, New Orleans just chose with the 28th pick Peyton Turner, defensive end out of Houston, which seems like a little bit of a reach because ESPN had him ranked 9th at the position.
I just tweeted about that before the draft started because there were some rumors out there that people said that he might be a first rounder. He was considerably later in the second round. This is like a very large reach by New Orleans. It may not be as big of a reach as like the Trey Lance pick in my data, just because I weight higher picks
right,
more than lower picks. But this is another type of Raiders type of, I think would be in that kind of realm of Lance and Leatherwood. And this pick with Peyton Turner. I think this is a second round pick that ended up in the first round, which happens.
So getting back to Scott's question about Kadarius Toney, Derek, you want to talk a little bit about Kadarius Toney?
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, I'm saying this as a Florida fan myself, but Tony was a really fun player, and after the catch, he's obviously fantastic. He's a really good athlete, but kind of to Scott's point, like he's more of a gadget player than like a real wide receiver because I mean, he was listed at, I think, like between 6'6'1", but if you watch him play, like you come away thinking he's like a 5'9" guy. Like he doesn't play very big. And I think in terms of running routes, I don't think he runs to his play speed. Like, I don't think he's going to be a guy who actually takes the top off of a defense like, Will Fuller or Tyreek Hill, something like that. I think he's a guy who you have to manufacture touches. To me, this feels a lot like the Cordero Patterson pick, 6 years ago or whatever that was. But the difference is probably that I don't think Tony is even going to give you the return value that Patterson gave you. Patterson's a Hall of Fame returner. Tony might be an okay returner, but I don't think he's going to be that. And then I don't think he's like a real wide receiver. So to me, this was, I think, a pretty big reach.
Or the running back snaps that Patterson has given over the years as well occasionally.
Right.
T. Trippett asked about the Peyton Turner pick, whether the reach reminds you of Marcus Davenport a couple years ago for the Saints.
In terms of like the value of the pick, no. Like I think that pick was actually right on value. People thought he was a middle first round player, but maybe someone else can. Like Derek, have you watched Peyton Turner? What do you think of him?
I mean, I think it's probably more of a reach. Like you said, I think Davenport was. I think the issue with Davenport was they just gave up a lot to get him, and I think that was probably more the issue.
The issue with Davenport was that they traded up and gave up a lot.
Right. If they had just been there at that pick, I think nobody would have really batted an eye. Whereas I think, to your point, Benjamin, like Turner, I think seems a lot more of like a reach here. I think, like you said, he was more of like a second, even third round player. So, I mean, to me, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I guess if they thought he wasn't going to be there at their second round pick and they didn't want to trade up a whole lot to get him, then I guess you take him because that's kind of what happens a lot in the end of the first round like this. But I mean, to me, I'm a little bit surprised he went here.
Is Turner even an outside edge rusher type defensive end? He's not even listed on our Saxier article.
Was he not?
Yeah, he's not listed in Saxier.
Oh,
he must not have necessarily been invited to the combine, even though there was no combine. They did invites.
Right. Maybe I don't know if that's maybe a matter of him just being listed as like a linebacker because of the way that their system is set up or something like that. I don't know. An edge rusher. But I mean, yeah, but he's going to be an edge rusher. Yeah.
Interesting. Scott, what was your biggest surprise of the draft? Would you say?
For me, that was what I was kind of going with Tony there, and it does seem like maybe he's more complimentary for the Giants than if they had gotten Rashad Bateman there or Elijah. Is it Elijah Moore? Derek, I can't even remember.
Yeah.
So like guys that maybe are duplicating some of the skills of their other players, but just given the lower floor there, maybe it would have made more sense for the Giants to go at a different position than wide receiver. They've addressed that with Galladay and some other moves.
Yeah. I'm waiting here for the Green Bay pick is in. I'm just waiting to announce that. So I'll start. Let's go to the top of the draft and talk about our reaction. Everybody knew the first two picks were going to be. That's not a shock. Trey Lance going third. What is everybody's thoughts about Trey Lance? That is the San Francisco pick. After all the discussion of was it going to be Jones or Fields or Lance, it ended up being Lance. Hold on. The Green Bay pick is in. It is cornerback Eric Stokes from Georgia, 29th overall to Green Bay. So back to Trey Lance. What was our opinions about the Trey Lance? My general opinion is that it's hard to know between Lance and Jones and Fields who was going to really be the better pro. So it's sort of like flipping a coin if you had a coin that had three sides.
Personally, if I were making the pick, I would have taken Fields because I think, and I've said this before on Twitter and stuff, like Fields to me would have been the first overall pick in like the past 10 drafts, like basically dating back to like Andrew Luck is probably where that line stops for me. I thought Fields was a fantastic prospect, so I would have taken him. But it seemed like it kind of came down to Lance and Jones for them. And at least to me, I think Lance was a considerably better pick there. I think it's a little bit corny or cheesy or whatever you want to say, but like he had a lot of experience under center with a lot of the play action stuff, calling a lot of their protections. I know his quarterback coach, Quincy Avery, has said that he was doing a lot of that stuff at North Dakota State, which is pretty insane given that he was a 19-year-old first-year starter, even if it's at the FCS level. So I think in terms of, mental readiness, he's going to be there for that system. And then the tools are just absurd. He might have the best arm in the class. He's a really good athlete. I think his pocket management was fantastic. The only issue, kind of with Lance coming out was how good was his accuracy. I didn't think it was bad, but I think, it was probably a step below the guys like Lawrence, Fields, and probably Wilson in this class. So I think he's probably at or slightly above the NFL baseline or can get there. So I think it was a great pick. I don't know what Benjamin, his data says in terms of where he was supposed to go. But personally, I loved Lance. I liked him more than Wilson. So I thought this was a really good pick for them.
So my data had him around like the 8 or 9 range. So, like Carolina or potentially Denver. So to me, like, I think that any of those picks, I'm not going to knock the pick in terms of value. When you're picking a quarterback like that, I think it's the right move. I think any of those quarterbacks is fine. The Lance thing for me, as someone who thinks about it from a data perspective, is all those things that you mentioned happened not just at a lower level of competition, but in a pretty low sample size. So you're basically not only projecting the jump in competition, there's all the raw traits and the skills. You watch the film, all the people watch the film and see some of the same things that you're talking about. But the thing that gives me a lot of pause, and I'll talk about why maybe it's not as big of a deal right now, but yeah, he barely threw the ball more than 20 times a game when he was at North Dakota State. The good news is that he doesn't have to play right away. They have Jimmy G. Jimmy G, it's hard to trade right now. We'll see what happens going forward. But Trey Lance is a really strong, really great developmental prospect. He might show a lot right away, and if so, that's great. You can get rid of Jimmy G. But Jimmy G gives you a strong floor. Trey Lance gives you a really high ceiling. I think puts them in a good position going forward.
I would expect Garoppolo to be the starter for this year. That I definitely agree with that. What about, we got a question from Jojo Bin X5 in the chat. Do you think Fields is going to end up starting a lot for the Bears this year, given that Dalton was already announced as a starter? So it's interesting. I think it's pretty clear Garoppolo probably starts in San Francisco. It's pretty clear that Wilson and Lawrence start for the Jets and the Jaguars. Fields is kind of in the middle. I don't know who's going to start between him and Dalton. What do you guys think?
To me, that could just be a situation of like, Dalton starts, but then like by week 4, he's out. You know what I mean? Like where Fields ends up starting more games over the course of the season. That's probably what I expect, is that maybe Fields isn't the week 1 guy, but he's probably going to end up taking, 11, 12, 10 or so of the starts. I think he's going to end up being the guy at some point because I think a guy just with his arm talent, the way he sees the field, his athleticism, like he's going to have the tools to be able to make plays, but I also think he's smart enough to play right away. So I think he's going to end up playing sooner rather than later.
For me, the fact that Fields is a dual threat, he ran on about 30% of his college touches. I think that's such a huge advantage for guys trying to make the adjustment from the college game to the NFL game, because they can start with a smaller playbook, maybe go through fewer reads and such. Whether or not Fields has any problems with that long term, I don't necessarily think that's a problem, but he can do that in the short term and then take off if he needs to. Kind of the way we saw Jalen Hurts maybe have some immediate success beyond what you would expect. I think that's just such a huge advantage for the modern quarterback.
So let me ask another topic here while we're waiting for Buffalo's pick to come in. So this is starting from the top and moving down. So the number 4 pick. What do you think about Atlanta? Did they make a mistake by not trading down with a team that wanted a quarterback, or is Pitts the right move? And I realize this question is looks a little different in the light of how much Fields and Jones dropped, because there may not have been a team that was willing to trade up to 4. In which case, I think Pitts, the guy's like ridiculously talented.
Right. I think if you weren't going to get any buyers, that was probably their best bet, right? Because I don't think they really need a tackle. So it's not like they were going to take a guy like Sewell. I don't think they really need receivers, so they weren't going to take Chase. Pitts, obviously the best guy on the board, I think, at that point. What I will say is that I think we might be overrating how much the Arthur Smith offense needs an uber talented tight end like that. I think they'll figure it out. But I think they could kind of get away with not having someone who is so just freakish the way that Kyle Pitts was. So I think in that sense, I would have liked to see them trade out. But, to your point, if there wasn't a good bidder, then what's the point of trading out? You might as well just take the best guy. Personally, I think the mistake was just not taking Fields, because I think Fields is just such a good quarterback prospect. They can sit behind Matt Ryan if they want. Yeah. Right, exactly. And they did restructure his contract to make it, I think, a little bit trickier to move on from him. But again, I think Fields was just so good that that's kind of a problem you just should be willing to take on.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on that, though, Derek, the salary cap problems that they have right now, I almost feel like it forced them down this path, because I don't think they could have afforded to get all their draft picks under the salary cap and everything without restructuring Ryan. And even after the restructure, it's really penalizing, where I think his dead cap hit next season is $40 million. It's not like they can't trade. It might be 2 years before they can get off of Matt Ryan, in which case I think taking the bigger picture path, I'm guessing that Smith thought that maybe makes more sense to try to just make it work with Ryan for a little bit longer. And then Pitts is very helpful in that respect.
I don't know if you've seen what's going on in Green Bay, but drafting a first-round quarterback when you can't get off your star veteran for 2 years because of salary cap constraints leads to problems. So I will say that. Buffalo has chosen at number 30. They took Gregory Rousseau, the defensive end out of Miami, which they needed an edge rusher badly. So this was mocked to them a lot, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I look in the data, there was a lot of running back for Buffalo, defensive back, linebacker, defensive line. I think they're making a strength stronger. They drafted AJ Epinesa last year in the second round out of Iowa. So they're restocking the cupboard at edge, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them later in the draft address, cornerback or linebacker along those lines.
By the way, I just want to point out that the ESPN listing for the draft lists the best fit for the Ravens at 31 as Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State, who is a Derek Klassen lookalike if you were wearing your glasses, Derek.
I have not heard that one yet before.
You'll have to
That's
trust
very
me,
interesting.
but just this picture that's in front of me right now looks a lot like a you with glasses on.
Keep your phone close, Derek. You may be getting a phone call shortly.
Maybe.
Joe Football points out Pitts seems like the perfect prospect, but the NFL has not been that great at identifying the best tight ends in the draft recently.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we know about tight ends is that most tight ends, we'll see if Kyle Pitts is like most tight ends, but they're slow to develop. You look at TJ Hawkinson, who was drafted out of Iowa in 2019. He's only now kind of just getting kind of into the flow of the NFL game. So, and same thing sort of with Noah Fant, his teammate who got drafted in Denver that year as well. The reason in my mock draft that I had the Falcons going for Justin Fields is that Atlanta was a much better team this past year than their record. When you look at the Pythagorean wins record data on Football Outsiders, they were a 7.5 win team. And so to me, if you just regress them a bit back to the mean, they're going to be picking in the middle of the draft next year. So to me, I think that long-term, it was a hard choice. I think Pitts is a fine choice. You're going to have to really manufacture targets for him, in my mind, to make this work. It's the same deal with picking Hawkinson high to me. I think that they're both worthy of the pick. You just have to dedicate your offense to giving them targets. And so, last year they had traded for Hayden Hurst, and he was utilized like to a certain extent, like well amongst tight ends. But in terms of like a valuable resource, like targets, they were giving targets to other guys in that offense. So hopefully, Pitts can kind of like soak up some of those targets, maybe even putting him at wide receiver. I've kind of joked with people, just play him at receiver, to be honest, because that's a way to get him the most targets. If you're going to flex him out anyway, just play him like a receiver, get him the ball, and hopefully he develops a lot faster than your average tight end does.
I wouldn't be surprised if they used a lot of 12 with him replacing Russell Gage and having him and Hurst on the field together at the same time with Pitts split out.
Or does your perspective change if they do end up trading Julio Jones? I mean, that's been a rumor the last couple of days as well, right? Maybe that would be a way they could get off some of their salary cap problems and then kind of build toward the future while also maybe being competitive in the short term.
Death by Cochlea asks, the Patriots getting Mac Jones without trading up, genius or luck?
I mean, to me, neither, because I don't think Mac Jones is that great. I mean, I guess in terms of where he was supposed to go, you could say luck, right? But I mean, I think Jones to me was probably a second round prospect. To me, I think he's, I think I wrote this maybe in my piece about him, or maybe I wrote it about somewhere else. But like I think in 99 out of 100 simulations, he's just Andy Dalton, which is fine. I don't know if that's what you want to take in the first round. So I'm not sure if it's genius or luck. I don't think it's the worst pick they could have made. The Patriots have certainly made worse draft picks recently, but
Mike Tanier actually compared Zach Wilson to Andy Dalton in his write-up.
Andy Dalton, don't knock Andy. So I'm a Bengals fan, so I'm going to defend Andy Dalton a little bit. Valuable player, especially in his position. When you look at the other quarterbacks taken in his draft class, he's had a pretty decent career. So to me, like Andy Dalton on the rookie deal, like it's not bad. Like it gives you a chance to win. And they have Cam Newton too. So to me, the draft is always about some luck. I think being able some other team not jumping them is lucky too. But yeah, I mean, it also takes some level of you need to be willing to take the risk. And so that's where like the genius is. So if this pick hits, that's going to set the Patriots up to be competitors again in their division. So
is it wrong that I think the fact that Kyle Shanahan apparently liked Mac Jones makes me think he's going to be better now? Like,
but
is that just illogical?
First of all,
I don't believe it.
First of all, I don't know why we believe Kyle Shanahan is this great evaluator of quarterback talent. He's a great user of quarterback talent, but that doesn't necessarily make him a great evaluator. But second of all, what if it was just all a big smokescreen and they never really liked Mac Jones or were thinking about Mac Jones in the first place?
Well, they traded to 3. What is it? I mean, why do they need to spread smoke screens?
I don't
because
know why
Kyle
NFL
Shanahan's a
teams
millennial and wanted to have a little bit of fun.
Is he a millennial? Wow, I didn't know.
I mean, I think so. Like, I think he's probably on like the outer edge, but yeah.
I mean, it turns out that if they wanted Mac Jones, they could have had him at 12 in this scenario. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's a lot of overconfidence too. So, no one denies Kyle Shanahan is a genius at calling plays, scheming stuff up. He's deserving as there is of that kind of moniker. But yeah, like San Francisco, they're on the lower end. Him and the John Lynch partnership of my draft surplus value rankings. Patriots a bit lower of late, so this will vindicate them a little bit. But yeah, 49ers, they're interesting in terms of some of the ways that they think about drafting players when they decide to.
What do you guys think of both the Bengals and the Dolphins going with receivers over offensive linemen? Because the Bengals did it, and then the Dolphins, people didn't talk about, I don't think people haven't talked about the Dolphins having this wide receiver versus offensive line debate the way they've talked about Cincinnati, but essentially both teams did the same thing. Both teams needed offensive linemen and wide receivers, and they both chose the wide receiver over the offensive lineman, with Jamar Chase going to the Bengals and Jalen Waddle going to the Dolphins.
I mean, to be honest, I hadn't even given the Dolphins that much thought in that regard, kind of to your point, because my assumption was just that the Bengals were going to take Sewell, because I think they should have. I think Sewell is a better prospect than Chase was. Not that Chase is bad, obviously. When I wrote him up, I think he's a really good receiver prospect. But I think if you're just building a team and you are trying to make things as easy as possible on your quarterback, you want to keep him upright, especially a guy who's now coming off of knee surgery. I think that's paramount. And to me, I think particularly with Joe Burrow is, coming out of college, and I think this was even true his rookie year, his whole thing is he's going to get the ball out to the right receiver and with a very accurate pass. And I think that is kind of a way to circumvent not having the best receiver talent. So to me, it didn't make as much sense to spend the 5th overall pick on a receiver. I think I would have liked to have seen them just take an offensive lineman and make sure he's as upright and, comfy as he needs to be.
So based on Sports Info Solutions charting, the Bengals finished 9th and the Dolphins finished 10th in offensive pressure rate last season. So maybe it's not quite as dire as we think it is. Like maybe their pass protection is better, in particular, like you said, with Burrow being able to get the ball out quickly. Do you buy into that?
My read on, I actually can't speak to this as much with the Dolphins, but my read on why this is true of the Bengals is a couple of reasons. One, I think it is true that Burrow gets the ball out on time. Generally, which is obviously going to help your pressure rate a little bit, but they operated out of empty a lot, which empty in general, you're going to be getting the ball out quickly. You're not going to be holding the ball for very long. That's just the nature of playing those 5-man protections like that. But I think they want to not be able to play like that. I think they want to be able to kind of do more, normal 11 personnel sets, get into regular gun sets, under center stuff, and not have to just rely on this, empty offense where you're just trying to scrape by with 4 or 5 yards at a time. I don't think that's what they want to do as like a huge chunk of their offense. And I think adding a guy like Sewell could have changed that. We'll see maybe if just putting Riley Reif on the right side changes that a little bit. I don't know. I don't really believe it, but I think Sewell kind of would have really allowed them to do a lot more things in protection that they just weren't able to do last year and had to circumvent with other, other avenues.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can I add really quick. So the thing that I see there is in a vacuum, I think you're right. I would pick Sewell over Chase in a vacuum. When we look at the strength of this class right now, the receiver position, there are about 4 or 5 players I had expected in the first round in terms of receivers. So in the second round, I think the talent level drops off quite a bit. What you're seeing right now in my data is that there's a lot of high quality offensive linemen still available in the second round. So I think it's a strategic decision made by the Bengals, as well as an evaluation decision to say, second round, we can draft an offensive lineman that we really like. I'm looking at my list of offensive linemen. I'm not sure if Tevin Jenkins is still on the board. He'd be at the top of it. Liam Eichenberg, Sam Cosme, Dylan Radens, Jalen Mayfield. Those are all prospects that should be available at pick, was it 38, 39, somewhere in there for what the Bengals are taking.
Jason Owa, the edge rusher from Penn State, went to Baltimore with pick 31, by the way. DJ Shibboleth says, thanks for the stream. I want to point out we are going to be streaming on Twitch all the time now, starting with every Thursday at 1 p.m. We're going to be doing Football Outsiders streams, talking football over the offseason on Twitch. So if you like this stream, you should check us out at 1 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays, starting a week from today. DJ Shibboleth also asks, how long do you think the Steelers can realistically afford to wait to draft a center?
I mean, at this point, it's going to have to be until tomorrow, right? And the thing
centers
is, at least
usually don't go in the first round anyways. Even the top centers usually go in the second or third.
Right. I mean, off the top of my head, the only guys I can remember even that go in the first round are all after like pick 25. Even it's the guys like Travis Frederick, and even Frederick was just like such a clear can't miss type of center prospect. And I don't know if this class really has any of those guys. So yeah, I think they'll probably end up taking one tomorrow, whether it's Humphrey or Dickerson or someone like that.
The Bucks just took their pick, by the way, to end the first round. Pick 32 is outside linebacker Joe Tryon from Washington. So the first round is over, which means Mike Tanier will be joining us soon. Benjamin, you were going to say.
Yeah, so a couple things. So yeah, in terms of second round centers, my top center by expected draft position is Landon Dickerson from Alabama. A lot of injury issues. He tore both of his ACLs, I think. That's poor luck. He's really never had a full healthy season. But when he's been a super productive lineman. And then like Derek said, Creed Humphrey is up there as well. Josh Myers from Ohio State. And then I have Drew Dahlman from Stanford as my fourth center. I want to say one thing real quick. In terms of players that did not get selected in the first round that I'm surprised by, number one is and I'm sure we'll get to this, but Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame.
We just got a
I'm
question about
really
him in the chat, in
surprised.
fact. Yep.
Really surprised he didn't go. He's my 17th ranked player. Tevin Jenkins up there as well, but I call him JOK. I'm really confused about why JOK did not go. People were saying, I think Todd McShay had him as the 5th ranked player on his board. Like, there's a lot of love for this guy. Very confused why he's not a first rounder. Derek, can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
So to be clear, I think he probably should have been, and I'm also surprised that he was not a first rounder, especially with a guy like Jamin Davis, being drafted at linebacker over him. I think that is a little bit crazy. To me, I think there's probably part of it has to do with Isaiah Simmons not looking as good in Arizona as people thought he was going to, and I don't think they're exactly the same player, but I think they offer that sort of pseudo linebacker, but can also do other stuff type of role. To me, what I'm assuming the issue with JOK is that he's not really a linebacker. I don't think he's going to be, big enough to really play in the box consistently. You're going to have to try to find ways to use him differently. I think he really, like, his natural fit is at nickel. But at that point, if you're going to just draft a nickel, you would rather just draft a guy who's a nickel cornerback. Like maybe an Aaron Robinson is probably going to go tomorrow. Asante Samuel is probably going to go tomorrow. Like you would probably rather draft a guy who is just strictly a nickel corner rather than a guy who you're kind of have to project as this, pseudo linebacker type. That to me is what I'm assuming is the issue. You probably need a pretty creative defensive mind to make him work the way that he's going to need to work.
Yeah, I thought Baltimore was a decent shot to get him just because they know how to use creative defensive players. And so I was surprised. Owe, he was definitely a guy that was kind of borderline first, second for me. So I'm not surprised. But I thought that JOK would have landed somewhere in that last group of the team. I was very surprised by that.
The other linebacker we had a question on was Micah Parsons, but I'm actually holding off on that until Mike Tanier shows up because I know that his opinion on Micah Parsons was different from mine. Let's just ask about another question on my list, kind of going through the draft picks from the beginning. Do you think Carolina took J.C. Horn too early at number 8?
I mean, in a vacuum, no, but I'm going to make this point as much as I can. Like, they should have just taken Fields because, Fields, like I said, is Fields is just a really good quarterback prospect, and they need a quarterback, and I think he would have been really good there. But I think if you remove that part of it from the equation, I think Horn is probably fine here. I comped him to Prince Mukamara, which is not the sexiest pick that you could possibly make at number 8, but Mukamara had a fairly decent career, and when he was in Chicago, he was a really, really good press corner for that system. And I think Horn can give you something along those lines, and hopefully be a little bit better.
What I can't reconcile is evidently the Panthers were aiming to trade down based on news reports from the previous few days. How could they not have taken that Bears offer if the Bears were trying to jump up and get Justin Fields? That seems like a real coup of value there that they could have had. Surely they would have gotten more out of that than the Horn pick on its own, right?
Yeah, I mean, the other piece too is, so in terms of value, I had him as the 13th ranked player, so second cornerback in terms of expected draft position. The thing that's kind of underrated is that the Panthers did in 2020, their entire draft was all defenders. So I thought Rashawn Slater was the guy that I had mocked them in my mock draft. He would have been, I think, a great selection for them. Like you said, Fields or Jones were there too. So I was surprised at Horn. I was also surprised that Denver went Surtain right after. I think that's just because, Surtain kind of, I think the marriage with the Dallas Cowboys was kind of something that was really heavily mocked. From my early collection of mock drafts last year to this year, his expected draft position kind of stayed really steady at 10, right around 9-10 area.
That jumps on what Aaron's probably going to talk about later, but I bet that influenced the Cowboys' actual draft selection. They probably thought they were getting a cornerback, and then suddenly they were both gone.
Yeah, sorry to everybody for the disappearance. I hit a wrong button on Zoom waiting for Mike Tanier, and it got rid of the visual. So we got to get the visual back a different way. But here comes Mike now. So once we get Mike on, we can ask him for his biggest surprise of the night. There the man is. Hello, Mike Tanier is joining our stream. Hello.
What's up, Mike?
Hello, everybody. It is great to be here. I'm a little bug-eyed, but I think we're all a little bit bug-eyed right
Yeah, it's a little late. As I get older, this becomes a little bit of a late night for me.
now. Well, I'm up at six o'clock every morning, so this is always a late night for me.
What was your biggest surprise of the first round? Early on, we talked about our biggest surprises. What was your biggest surprise of the first round?
It has to be Mac Jones slipping like this, and in the one sense, it's a little bit of a validation of what a lot of us have been saying on Twitter. This is a guy that doesn't look like the third overall pick, doesn't look like a top five pick, looks more like a late first round or a day two pick. So on the one hand, it's a validation. On the other hand, when are we ever validated? When is that insight ever rewarded with it actually happening? So to see him slip, to see him fall into Bill Belichick's lap, and I'm sure that will be discussed endlessly and be turned into some elaborate conspiracy theory or whatever. What was absolutely shocking. I had no idea that he was going to slip past number 3 and that some team wasn't going to leap. I assumed that the Bears were leaping up to gobble him. I was surprised that they were the ones who leapt up and got Fields instead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the problem is because people talked about him being such a strict pocket passer. Once he didn't go to San Francisco,
Right.
then it became like which team is going to take him because I think most people before all that talk started about San Francisco likes Jones, San Francisco likes Jones, San Francisco likes Jones. I think that everybody had Fields ahead of Jones. So
Yes.
once it turned out San Francisco didn't like Jones, I kind of thought Fields was going to go ahead of Jones. So when Chicago made that trade, I thought they were trading for Fields.
At the same time, they were available for trade. Washington just sat tight and took a linebacker. Took a linebacker.
Overdrafted one.
Say again?
They overdrafted one.
Yes.
That's the bigger issue too.
Yeah, I have about 3 or 4 linebackers on the board ahead of him. I have Jeremiah from Notre Dame. I'm not going to try that right now.
That's who we were talking about right before you came on. Yep.
Yeah, that's a heck of a player. I have Dylan Moses ahead of him. Of course, you can't take any more Alabama players for the Washington defense. That would be like taking more Clemson guys for the Raiders, although now there's going to be a rumble in the parking lot between Urban Meyer and Mike Mayock for all the Clemson players coming out of the draft. But you had Washington that stood pat and took a linebacker, like you said. You had the Saints who took a defensive end from Houston who reminds me of Tano Kapasamwa, who looks like sort of a five tech true gapper type of guy. These teams could have been the team that jumped up and got Mac Jones if the NFL loved him the way we heard for the last 3 months that the NFL loved him so.
So I wanted to ask you, someone in our stream chat asked about him, and I know that from your write-up we had different opinions about Micah Parsons to the Cowboys.
Yeah, that's a Cowboys kind of move. They value linebackers differently than I think a lot of teams in the league do. They use them more thoroughly than a lot of teams in the league do. I don't have the numbers this year or last year in terms of how often they were in base 4-3. Probably not as much as the Seahawks are, but in the past, when they had Kyle Vander Esch and they had Sean Lee and everybody was healthy, they wanted to stay in base a lot. So, that makes sense there. I don't hate that pick because I think he's Bobby Wagner, frankly. They clearly saw the 2 cornerbacks they liked. I think they would have taken Horn or Surtain if they were still there. They moved down and got, I think, an extra third out of it. That's a solid move overall. I think they still need cornerback help, and that could be a problem because a lot of cornerbacks went tonight. But I don't think that was a bad move overall for the Cowboys.
That my thought was exactly what you just said, which was teams just don't use 3 off-ball linebackers that much these days. But
right.
I guess from what I was seeing afterwards, people were talking about Vander Esch having a lot of injury issues and Jalen Smith having a lot of struggles over the last year or two. So maybe that pick isn't as ridiculous as I first thought it was. I mean, I'm not that I'm questioning the player, more than I'm just questioning the, how many off-ball linebackers are you going to use? Well, it may turn out they're not going to use 3. That Vander Esch can't stay healthy, and they're not going to pick up his 5th-year option, and so Parsons will go right into the starting lineup.
I think even with Parsons, I think even if they, whenever they end up in 2 linebacker sets, I think Parsons should just straight up be on the field over Smith. Like Smith
Yeah.
He was a great prospect, and he had some good stuff early on, but like he just doesn't have the juice anymore, man. And it's really sad, but he just doesn't. And Parsons is the opposite, where he just is the most just monster athletic guy you're going to have on the field at that position. But I think even if they do a lot of 4-3 stuff, this is going to depend on how creative they can be on defense. But like Parsons was the defensive end coming out of high school, and you can just play him at Sam. You can play him a little bit on the edge. You can do probably a lot of the stuff that like the Seahawks have done with KJ Wright. In that respect, how much they're going to want to do that, I don't know. But I think that's a viable way that they can actually get all three of those linebackers on the field without just, looking like they're chickens with their heads cut off.
Is there a comparison to be made with last year, them taking CeeDee Lamb, where they're a little bit more dedicated to best player available in their mind than like positional fit, which I think that's something that in general I would really advocate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The mentality a lot of times in Dallas, get big, fast guy from big program who play football. Like they don't really do a lot of that positional fit stuff. It's very old fashioned. It's does Jerry like you, and does Steven like you, and that's kind of the thing. So for them to think a little bit in terms of value and move back and not just say, oh, we'll take Parsons at 10 and get an extra pick there. There's a little bit of a signal there in terms of approaching things analytically. We like to joke, they're a little more analytic than you might think they are. That said, when it's time to go grab a big, strong hombre, that's what they're going to do.
Someone also asked earlier about you're giving an A to the Detroit Lions pick. You want to talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah, I think I had in my head that they were going to take a receiver. They're going to take Devontae Smith there, or they were going to take one of the cornerbacks. But Penei Sewell, best left tackle on the board, one of the 3 or 4 best players on the board. Absolute, not a position of need necessarily for them because they've invested in the line in the past, but it's almost like, if you need a quarterback, get your quarterback. If you need an offensive lineman, take the best offensive lineman on the board, period. You're going to go out there in the second round, you're going to upgrade at wide receiver. You may not be able to upgrade at left tackle. Both of the Moores are there at wide receiver. We can start listing names here, but Leatherwood's gone. Vera Tucker at guard is gone. Some of those top offensive linemen are gone. So they're plugging in and playing somebody who I think is going to be a starter, probably a Pro Bowl caliber starter for the next 10 years. And this is a team that has so many needs. But to talk about the Lions' needs right now, it's just ridiculous. Everything is a need. Go get the best guys you can.
Yeah. So Stephen Ruiz had this really great quote. I heard he said, "You have to earn the right to draft for need," and the Lions are gonna eventually get there. So this is a kind of a longer term pick. He was the best player on the board for me as well. I'm actually not quite. Mac Jones was technically the best player on the board for me, but I think on their board, if you're not going to take a quarterback there, then that's the player to take. And then the other piece is, the Jared Goff situation there. You wouldn't benefit as much. It's kind of similar in some ways to the Atlanta situation. You're not going to benefit as much from having the rookie quarterback friendly contract because you still have this heavy veteran contract. And like I said, Detroit, they're thinking long term. I think this is a really strong move, foundational piece for them going forward.
Well, the whole you earn the right to draft for need comment brings us back to the whole pick that we started talking about 45 minutes ago, which was Jacksonville and Etienne. So I'm curious, Mike, that was the pick that we started with me shaking my head about. Mm-hmm. And Derek, you said something about that you don't even think Etienne's going to be a good third down back. Isn't he supposed to be a really good receiver?
Well, he's a decent pass catcher. I don't think he's going to be a particularly electric route runner. I think he's really good with the ball in his hands. To me, the issue is he can't pass block at all. Like right. He's going to be an absolute, it's going to be a liability. It's going to be kind of the same issue with like Aaron Jones in Green Bay, where like people are always like, oh, why do they keep playing Jamal Williams? It's like, well, because they trust one of them to block the quarterback. And Aaron Jones can't really do that. And Aaron Jones is obviously really good in a lot of other ways and still has a lot of value. And hopefully that's the end game with Etienne here. But I think if you're drafting a guy in the first round, you have to have a guy who's going to be reliable on all three downs. And if they can just only get him out in pass routes, maybe it'll be fine. But I think you're never really going to be able to rely on him as a pass blocker, and that's going to be a problem to me.
Yeah, you would hear like the McCaffrey. Oh, he's a McCaffrey. It's like McCaffrey's the high end, I think, for ETN, and a guy who's a solid all-purpose back, but isn't talked about in that way and doesn't catch 100 passes. That's what I see in this individual. And when Najee Harris got drafted, it's like, okay, first round running back by a team with a need at running back that has a lot of other things in place. It still has playoff aspirations the next 2 years. I get it. I think that's a good pick. Plus, I think Harris is the better player. When you come back into the Jacksonville Jaguars and you have to rebuild everything, this is, and I couldn't quite articulate it when I was putting it in print because I was kind of shocked that they did it. Like, this is sort of the Steve Spurrier-ish move. Like, I'm the old ball coach. I'm going to go get all the weapons, and it's going to go into my offense. I'm going to throw Tim Tebow in there, and it's going to be amazing. And that kind of sets off an alarm because, you know, when you have the college coach and they do something that's not really analytically sound, and possibly they reach for talent at a place where, you know, there were linemen on both sides of the ball. There were defensive players all over creation they could have added. It signals that he's not thinking like an NFL general manager personnel guy. And that sets off a lot of flares to me.
Luckily, Jacksonville has, you know, 5 picks in the top 100. Mm-hmm. So they'll have some time and some chances to right the ship tomorrow. But it's also in addition to all the evidence we have that running back is a very replaceable position. As we spoke earlier, they had great production out of an undrafted free agent last year. So to me, the high end McCaffrey, like, that's great too. But, you know, I think in fantasy last year, Mike Davis was really great. So, I mean, he's not McCaffrey, but it's definitely serviceable.
As somebody who had McCaffrey in all his leagues and ended up with Mike Davis off the waiver wire, I can tell you Mike Davis was really great last year.
Right. Mike Davis is actually a good player, guys. So let's not slander the guy just because a few teams mistakenly cut him.
And how much better is ETN going to be than Robinson? I mean, he's going to be better. 10%, 15%. It's that conversation we always have. You know, are we going to see a thing where, Robinson blocks better, so it's 3rd and 8 and he's on the game as Derek pointed out. As soon as those things come into equation, the ETN pick becomes a real question.
It's a dollars move as well. It turns out that when you look at the salary data, go over the cap and look at the top running backs. It wouldn't surprise me if it was Saquon Barkley, to be honest. So he's like, when you pay a first-round running back, it's not just about paying the price in terms of draft capital.
Right.
They also make a ton of money relative to even your like replaceable, very serviceable backs, like even Mike Davis, like even other ones. Like, the production is not necessarily what you're going to get. You're not really getting a huge benefit in production, and also the cost is just so much higher. It's right. Very, very confusing.
As a counterpoint, can I just say that their offense is going to be super exciting this season? So, I mean, like, there's juice to this, which will be fun, even if it's not the savviest move necessarily.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, I just don't know if I feel great about whoever's going to be blocking for all those weapons.
They have a decent line in place. That's one thing I've been sanguine about. If you look at Norwell, they kept Robinson.
Robinson was the weirdest franchising player move, though. He's not that great. They've got some pieces on the offensive line, but
it's not this disaster that you normally see picking first overall. It's not the Jets with Mekhi Becton and 4 George Fants. You know, there are capable veteran starters at the positions.
Yeah, Jacksonville was 13th in offensive pressure rate last season.
So
and a lot of that was the backups to Minshew and Minshew's whole, you know, groovy, wavy, cravey thing where he drops back and like, you know, waits 8 seconds for somebody to flash open and then tries to make a miracle play. So
the Jets
taking
the guard to play next to Becton. Seems like a good pick to me.
Yeah, I didn't love them trading up for him.
That trading up, I don't love trading up for anybody who's not a quarterback. So
they gave up a lot too. Like, they gave up multiple day 2 picks.
Yeah. And what's your? Did you do a lot of work on Vera Tucker? I did a decent amount of work on him, but what's your take on him, Derek?
Not particularly, but I do love the idea of just, if you're going to take a quarterback, you should also try to keep him upright. And I think to your point that you mentioned with the Jets earlier, like, they are probably more of the type of offensive line that you see picking 1st, 2nd, 3rd overall. Like, they were mostly terrible. And Mekhi Becton, I think, is going to be good. Yeah. But, you know, like you said, like, the rest of those 4 guys, like, I don't know. But I think Vera Tucker, especially because you can just kick him into guard, which is what he played before last year. So I think it's going to be a good pick. Their weapons are not that bad, honestly. I think it would have been better to upgrade if they could at some point. They probably will on day 2, but I think it probably made more sense to try to get the offensive lineman here.
It's funny because the history of Jets picks, you know, there's that video on the web of the history of Jets picks, like, and the fans like booing Jets picks. They were so excited about Zach Wilson, and then Vera Tucker got announced, and they were so apathetic, like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I have no idea whether I should be cheering this or not
Right.
cheering this.
It's not a sexy
Who is
pick.
this person?
Not a sexy pick at all, but it's important. I will say that in my data, so the expected draft position for Elijah Vera Tucker was 15. So they must have felt that they needed to get up to that point to make sure that they could grab him. Whether it's a good move or not, yeah, like I think they just want to make sure that Zach Wilson has, at the bare minimum, a good amount of pass protection next year, so that they're not putting him in such a poor situation like they had with Sam Darnold.
But Darisaw was on the board. Where was Darisaw on your projections?
So I had, so let me take a look. I had him as the third tackle. I had him at 17. So I had Vera Tucker at 15, and I had Darisaw at 17. I thought Darisaw was another big value pick. The Vikings, they are a really strong drafting team when it comes to how I look at the draft in terms of expected versus actual. Trader Rick, they traded down and acquired. It was like a weird exchange a little bit. I think I was confused at some of the compensation there, where I think they got 2 third-round picks from the Jets and gave them the 4th for moving down 9 picks. So I'm assuming that the trade worked for them because they did it. But yeah, so I thought it was strange that Darisaw fell as long as he did, and because I thought that there was a decent amount of noise of him getting picked at 14. So the fact that they got the same guy they might have wanted to take at 14 at 23 is a huge win for the Vikings. So they come out of this night as a winner for sure.
The Caesar asks about the Browns pick of Gregory Newsome, that the Browns already have Ward and Greedy Williams, and they added Troy Hill. So do they really need another quarterback on top of that versus taking something like a linebacker?
I wouldn't hate it. Go ahead.
Oh, I would just say, I mean, a lot of those cornerbacks get banged up a lot, so that might be part of their reasoning for doing that. Personally, I was probably slightly lower on Newsome than where a lot of people were. I think he has incredibly smooth hips. His feet are really fast, but I think he didn't really know where to bring those hips and feet a lot of the time. And I think he got away. I think he got away with that a little bit more in 2020 when he played a much easier schedule than he did in 2019. So I think it was probably fine. I will say I think it's funny that if the reasoning was, our cornerbacks are kind of banged up a lot and we need a little bit of help, we'll bring this guy in. Newsome was banged up like a lot in college. Like he never played a full season. So I think if that was their reasoning, it was kind of weird to bring him in as that guy.
Did you guys hear the Andrew Berry quote from like maybe it was a year or two ago? He's like, "Oh yeah, you can never have enough cornerbacks."
I believe it.
I mean, especially in this league. Like, I mean, they've had pretty bad injury luck with Williams, with Grant Delpit, who they drafted last year as well. So I think this kind of just adds to the depth that they want to have.
I had that feeling about Denver taking Surtain too. Like Denver's got 3 corners, but they're a little older, and Surtain has so much talent. And like, is it bad to have 4 corners when you play Kansas City twice a year, right?
Right, and the linebacker thing, when you're playing Lamar Jackson twice a year, and when you're playing a Steelers team that might be thumping the ball or throwing over the middle short a lot more than getting the Jeremiah, getting a Dylan Moses. That wouldn't have been a terrible move either. But I do like Newsome. I do see the logic. And like Derek said, they've had injuries there. They're bringing in guys from the Rams, et cetera, et cetera. You're the Browns. Get strong in a position. Get strong in another position. Don't be like we're filling holes. Continue to grow in as many ways as you can. Because the trap you fall into for a team like the Browns is, we made the wild card for the first time in 15 years. Let's not react to this well, and I think they've reacted to it very well. They're just kind of adding pieces and so saying, fix this, and we're a Super Bowl team.
Well, given the Browns' like relative extreme reliance on analytics, like it wouldn't shock me to learn if they were maybe not even interested in drafting linebackers, like in the first round of a draft. Like that would be like a kind of a forward-thinking analytical perspective. So maybe they have a different view on positional value than a lot of other teams.
Right, that's possible.
DJ Shibboleth asks, what do we think, because we're talking about some running backs, of Kene Nwangwu? Is that a player who's on your radar?
I will hunt him down in my notes. Give me one moment.
He's not in my draftable running backs in terms of expected draft position. I don't think he had enough.
It's not a name. It's not a name I'm familiar with, to be honest.
I think he'd be a late draftee
Iowa
if he's
State
drafted
running
at all.
back.
Yep, Iowa State. Yeah.
Yeah, I did not do a report on him because I only went, deep enough for to get to the 4th round if I have to. So I'm afraid I have nothing.
Yeah, he's my RB20, so like that's undrafted for me.
Oof.
Sorry, we don't have Shibboleth, that we do not have a scouting report for you on Mr. Nwangwu.
He's fast. That's about it, I think.
He's apparently an interesting collection of big strengths and big weaknesses, which honestly sounds like a lot of undrafted running backs. Like,
you remember that David Montgomery bit? He's got the legs of Saquon Barkley, but in this case, it's like some different Frankenstein of things that aren't as good.
Yeah.
I wish him the best of luck.
I was going to say, like, undrafted running backs are usually like a collection of big strengths and big weaknesses, like LeGarrette Blount.
Right.
Well, except for James Robinson, who is pretty good at a lot of things, unlike the Jaguars don't agree. Yeah.
Right.
So, what do we think are the best players left for round 2? Now, what do we talk about the beginning of tomorrow night?
Oh my goodness! Let me get my list up.
I can pull up my list real quick. So I have, obviously we talked about Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame. I have Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State, Elijah Moore from Ole Miss. I have Trayvon Merrick from Texas Christian, and then to round out the list of like my top 5 guys that weren't drafted in the first, Azeez Ojulari, outside linebacker, edge rusher from Georgia. So it's like a lot of defensive players, and you add in Jenkins and Moore as players that fell out of the first round.
Yeah, he was the subject of our last futures, Ojulari.
Yeah, I loved him too. And what it is, he's not the most flashy edge rusher. But if you want your defensive end to be a defensive end, if you want him to stand up against the run, if you want him to be somebody who can do a sacrifice on like a twist, et cetera, you're dropping into coverage a few times. Like, who's it? Landry from the Titans.
Harold Landry, yep.
Yeah, he's going to drop into coverage pretty frequently in that scheme. You're dropping into coverage 4 or 5 times a game. Yeah, so a young man from Georgia is definitely someone. I liked him better than some of the guys some of the edge rushers who were taken. All the centers are still sitting out there. This is an incredibly strong center class. And if the young man from Alabama, if you're worried about his injuries, I understand that. Quinn Moretz, the Wisconsin Whitewater, the official small school offensive lineman that we have one of every year that like blows up the Senior Bowl. Creed Humphrey, that's a strong group of players as well. And Derek, you mentioned a couple of those wide receivers. I like both Moores, Frank. I like Moore from Mississippi. I like the Moore from Purdue. I think both of them can be big time players. There's probably 5 or 6 guys down the list on wide receiver as well that I think are going to be.
Terrace Marshall,
yes. From LSU. I'm drawing a blank on the young man from Clemson. He'll wind up with
Amari Rodgers.
Yes, he'll wind up with the Jaguars or the Raiders. But Amari Rodgers, like a Debo type player.
And I'll mention from a fantasy football perspective, there is an apparent like big 3 running backs in this class, the guys that have a chance to be sort of day one every down backs. And Javonte Williams is the last one left that could go in the second round from my alma mater, North Carolina. So let me give him a shout.
I think for me personally, it's probably the 2 guys that I have my eye on most are probably Trevin Moehrig from TCU. I think he can be something similar to what Harrison Smith is. I think you can just play him all over. And I think he's a menace down near the box for a guy his size. I think he's just really willing. I think he's really rangy. And I think he can play a little bit of man coverage. So I was kind of surprised he didn't go, especially because like, you generally would expect there to be one safety, but there just weren't any.
This was supposed to not be a good safety class, though, right?
I could see him at 33, to be honest. I thought he was a fit to Jacksonville at 25, so they could maybe get him at 30. I honestly thought that they could have done Etienne at 33 and Merrick at 25. So if you reverse it, I mean, it's a higher salary, but you're still getting some good guys. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think the point about 25 is perfect. I think I did a mock draft a couple of days ago, and that's where I put him because I think it just made so much sense in terms of what they need. The relative value there, I think, was just perfect. The other one to me was probably Ojulari. I think I wrote that he's the guy who I really want on my team, but would have probably not taken in the first round in a normal edge class. But this is not a normal edge class. I think guys would just have to get pushed up. And obviously some did, but I will say I think he's better than some of the guys that did get pushed up. I think he's better than Rousseau. I think he's better than Turner. And, to Mike's point, I think he's a guy who's going to be a fantastic run defender. If you need a guy who's going to take on pullers, take on split blocks, he's going to be able to do that fantastic. He's going to be able to drop in coverage a little bit. And I think, he's probably never going to be your best pass rusher. He probably shouldn't be, but I think he can be a decent number 2 in terms of just the pass rush and then just be a fantastic rundown player. And I think To the point I made, like that's probably better than what you're going to get from a lot of these other guys that I think went in the very late first round.
I think he also had some medical on him as well. Like there was some like knee issue that came up late too. I saw his stock go down a bit in mock draft. So it's like surprising, but not surprising in that way.
Let's finish up with our last 3 questions from the chat. Do we think the Steelers could make a move day 2 for Creed Humphrey? Yes, I think that the Steelers making a move for one of those centers makes a lot of sense.
Yep, I agree.
Mike, thoughts on the Eagles' strategy tonight?
I cannot fathom the Eagles' strategy, and I am of two minds about Devontae Smith. I am not one of these, guys on Twitter saying it doesn't matter if he weighs, 117 pounds soaking wet because his tape looks good. I am concerned, and I watched, and Philadelphia fans watched Deshaun Jackson's entire career, and while there are these breathtaking moments and he's had these great seasons, 10th overall, trying to rebuild, trying to get some kind of traction under this team. Is that when you want to take a Deshaun Jackson? No, you took a Deshaun Jackson when you were when you had Donovan McNabb and you were trying to build that. So I don't understand trading down then trading back up. I mean, I get it because Devontae Smith fell at that point and that's the guy they wanted. I can't see how this team is building right now. I don't know how confident they are in Jalen Hurts because I'm not very confident in Jalen Hurts. I thought it was going to be Rashawn Slater. I think even on NFL Network they were talking about it. Some of my friends who are more embedded with the Eagles than I am were talking about Rashawn Slater. I'm like, oh, I get it. You're going to make this plan to rebuild this offensive line, which currently consists of a bunch of guys in their 30s who are either injured or mad that the team's not good anymore in Lane Johnson's case. Now you do this, and so I don't understand it. I mean, I think we got a good player, but I don't understand how this team's going to build and grow based on what they're doing right now.
And finally, is Kyle Trask as awful as I think he is?
Yes, he is. He is not good. I said this earlier.
He throws a lot of interception-worthy passes, right?
Yes.
I was just about to. I said this on other podcasts. I don't think he actually threw that many interceptions. But if you watch the tape, he gets away with just nonsense. And it's, I mean, part of that is because he's throwing to Kyle Pitts, and Kyle Pitts kind of erases some of your mistakes. But I think he legitimately just got lucky in terms of guys dropping picks. And if he had probably had just average interception luck, I'm not even sure we would be looking at him as a draftable player because I mean, personally, I don't know if I would draft him. So the short answer to the question again is yes, Kyle Trask is as bad as you think he is.
Yeah, his Q-base projection was really bad too, so I'm not a fan.
Early third round expected draft position for me.
Ooh, that is burning a pick. Yeah.
the place for Connor Cook level prospects go to die.
Connor Cook
I think it's worth the risk. I think it's worth the risk to get a chance at development of quarterback in the third, fourth round. No, it's not bad. I don't think in my mind you could do worse.
I guess because it's a quarterback, and if you strike, you have struck in this amazing way.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't get that if you go out and get a second tier.
I'd rather have Kellen Mond.
Sure.
He
had great head coach. He had great receiving options. I mean, he had He had Tony this year, Trask this year as well. He had
Pitts.
Freddie Swain, Trayvon Grimes will get drafted this year. He's played with a lot of draftable offensive players on the receiver side. Not as much on the offensive line, but on the receiver side, he has had a lot of weapons.
Isn't that a point against him? That's something in Playmaker Score that I think harp on a lot, is that those guys can prop up your stock as a quarterback.
Yeah, definitely. Just ask Johnny Manziel.
Being sober also helps.
Who should be the next quarterback taken?
I mean, personally, I think it should be Mond, and I think I tweeted something to this effect today. I think I tweeted my rankings because I don't think I ever ranked them for whatever reason this year. But to me, Mond is the last guy I would probably even spend a draft pick on because I just don't think any of the other guys are that good. So I'm expecting to see Mond at some point tomorrow. I'm expecting to see some other quarterbacks at some point tomorrow. Probably Davis Mills, but I think like I said, if I were picking the next quarterback, it would probably be Mond for me.
Yeah, I would go with Mond also, definitely. He's the next guy.
Davis Mills is the next guy on my list. Expected draft position of about 55, so sometime in that second round, yeah.
I feel like I'd rather just get Ian Book or somebody at this point. I mean, I think it's going to end up being Trask. I'm maybe not quite as down on him as Derek is, although I just agree with everything Derek said there. And I can see some team getting him. and he gets in there, and he could have like these Trask could have these Nick Foles like runs where everything is working just right for him and he looks stellar, and then have these Nick Foles like runs where it's 2 interceptions and 3 strip sacks in like 5 quarters. But that's somebody when you can do things like that, you end up in the NFL, and you wind up in the NFL maybe for 7 or 8 years.
That's like a 4th or 5th round pick right there.
That's that's above average to average quarterback from a 4th or 5th round pick. I mean, why are we talking about that in a bad way?
If this is if things break right. I'm talking about if the things break right, though. If things break wrong, he's Nathan Peterman.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that's a lot of interceptable passes.
Right.
Yeah, Davis Mills to me was the only one who had been even discussed. Mond a little bit. I didn't see it in mock drafts much, but Mills was discussed as a late 1st round pick by some people. Not as seriously, but to me, that's like a signal a little bit that I would expect him to be the first one off the board, not just from the data.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap it up for tonight. I want to thank everybody who's tuned in to our first Twitch live stream and remind you we're going to be doing these Twitch live streams now every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then during the season, I believe every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So check those out. Please subscribe to our channel. Check out our streams. I want to thank Derek Klassen, Benjamin Robinson, Scott Spratt, Mike Tanier for joining me. Thank you all for tuning in, everybody. And hopefully everybody enjoys the second and third night of the draft. Don't forget to check out footballoutsiders.com on Friday night because Mike is going to continue doing his pick-by-pick analysis for rounds 2 and 3. And, thank you all for joining me. And so long, everybody, until next Thursday on Twitch.